Humans were not born into a post-industrial society where you could get a loaf of bread merely by going to the store. No, they were born for a much different habitat. And perhaps it's the disjunct between the habitat in which we evolved and adapted and the habitat in which we currently live, the habitat we created for ourselves. Perhaps that's the disjunct, and that causes a lot of diseases, or things that we call diseases, things that can't spread, but things that still nonetheless cause us a whole bunch of problems. So I'd like you to be able to list the differences between environments humans evolved in and the environment they live in. Relate these differences to things like myopia, breast cancer, and obesity, and explain the adaptive significance of fever. So who we were? Well, back in the day, paleo. Back in the history, hunter-gatherers, we were hunter-gatherers living during an ice age. For the past 13,000 years, we've been living with various degrees of agriculture. But I want you to picture this man. He's a hunter-gatherer. He's curious about everything. He is interested in that. He knows what that plant is. He knows what this plant is. He knows that this one is good for, well, building a house maybe. That one's good for, well, a flute perhaps. And this one over here is medicinal. That one over there is food. That one over there is, well, poisonous. He knows all the plants of the forest. He knows all the animals of the forest, most of the fungi of the forest. A very intelligent man who do great in biology, and who has never had a sandwich. He has never had something that is made of wheat from plants 2,000 miles away, processed in a mill 3,000 miles away, packaged in plastic that comes from oil underneath the earth, and then shipped to your doorstep by a delivery drone. This is not something he's had. He hasn't had cheese in the sandwich. He hasn't had something that you feed corn to a large bovine, then you milk the bovine, then you take the milk, then you process it a certain way, and then you put it on a sandwich. He hasn't had meat from you get the idea. Basically, this is a man who eats what he sees and sees what he eats and sees where it comes from and knows what animal it is. We are very different than that. But it's only been about 650 generations between living in the wild, with the wild, and living in, well, these indoor caves. So the lifestyle is very different. Now I want to kind of point out that the lifestyle is a lot more exercise. So I drove 9 miles back and forth to work today. Well, what if I had to walk that? Well, that's about 100 calories per mile, so that's 900 calories that I'll need to make up for in other food sources. What kind of food am I eating? Well, I mostly eat sandwiches and potatoes and such like that. That's not exactly what my ancestors would have eaten. They would have eaten lean game, wild fowl, eggs, fish, shellfish, fruits, veggies, nuts, maybe honey if they could get it. It's the sweetest thing they would know is honey. Whereas we eat things like fatty meat. So we're eating 85% lean, it's 15% fat, beef, fat poultry, chicken wings and such. You eat eggs. Some of us get to eat fish and shellfish, others of us don't. Fruits, vegetables, legumes. Legumes are much of a bigger part of our diet than someone in the wild would ever have. Cereal grains, milk products, sugar, sweeteners, separated fats, alcohol. These are things that are generally towards our sweet tooth, and we'll cover teeth in a different class, of course. But our diet is very different from theirs, and our lifestyle is very different than theirs. So, how much gene frequency can change is actually evident here. What we have is the L68Q allele. And that causes, it's an allele that tends to cause brain hemorrhage. What we see is that people who have this allele tend to die young. It used to be at a much higher frequency in the population, but has, since the 1800s actually, it's been on the decrease. We can see that, yes, gene frequencies can change in 4 generations. And, well, back in the day, we had like 5 or 6 it's been, what is the number again? 650 generations. So, allele frequencies can change in 4. We know that allele frequencies probably changed in 650 generations, but has it been enough? Has it been enough to change us from the hunter-gatherer society, such as the, and I hope I don't botch the name, Kung people who walk 5 to 6 miles per day? They hunt, they gather, they know the land. We hunt as far as the fridge, and during lockdown we may have hunted a little closer to ourselves. But this is a very different lifestyle, and gene frequencies can change given that some genes are going to be adaptive in the new lifestyle. So, kind of want to go back on the diet there just a little. So how much does a diet actually change things? Think about milk, for example. Milk is going to be high in lactose. So lactose is generally a sugar that humans should not be able to digest because after weaning, there's really no need for milk in the diet. But I could go out and drink a quart of milk, maybe, I don't really want to, and I wouldn't die. I wouldn't get really, really sick. I might regret it, but I wouldn't get incredibly sick off of drinking a fair amount of milk because I have the lactase gene still enabled. Basically, I have a baby gene that is still turned on. Some populations don't have this baby gene turned on. For others, it was adaptive to have that baby gene stay on later so they could enjoy the milk of some large animal. And you see the genes did change, the diet did change, and the diet probably led the genes to change. Well, let's talk about modern problems. Myopia, or short-sightedness, you may have heard it before as you're being myopic, you're being short-sighted, is much more frequent now than it likely was back in the day when people were living, outside, because we don't have to focus so much on things far away anymore. So it makes sense that there's no natural selection against myopia. It also makes sense that there is kind of an environmental factor going on here too, where people often spend a lot of their time looking at things that are very close, unless your eyes kind of acclimate to that. So there is an environmental factor. There's a study done on the Inuit people where they brought them inside, had them focus on things closer to them, and the rate of myopia went up greatly. There's also a genetic factor here where monozygotic twins are likely to be very much the same when it comes to having, if one has myopia, might as well get the two for one deal on glasses. So we can see both genetic and environmental factors going together here. Same is true for breast cancer. Breast cancer could be a viral disease spread by some parasites that are often found on mice. What we see is a higher incidence of breast cancer when certain species of mice are present, but not others. And this is one of those potential correlations that may be leading to a causative factor of why breast cancer may be more common in industrialized societies that are, more in the presence of certain mice. It could also be a lifestyle choice. There is, of course, a genetic component to it, the BRCA gene, but there could be lifestyle choices that increase the frequency and likelihood of breast cancer. Some would even go as far to say that not being constantly pregnant is a cause of breast cancer. Some would say that birth control is a cause of breast cancer. These things require much more research before they can be fully parsed out. However, one thing we are hypothesizing currently is that it could be certain types of plastics. These types of plastics can be degraded by UV light, and when they are degraded by UV light, they have a tendency towards releasing things that are almost estrogen-like, which are known to cause problems in males, but could also be causing problems in breast cancer and in prostate cancer. Next up, obesity. So obesity is one of these things where we have a couple different theories as to why there has been such a recent rise in obesity. What we see here is, by recent rise, we can look at the 1860s, and you can compare that with 2005. So 145 years, or about 7 generations of humans, and we've moved all the way from about underweight to normal, all the way into the overweight category when it comes to the mean. You can see how this actually changed in just about a single generation between the 1970s and 2005. It changed substantially. So why is obesity going up so quickly in America? Well, there are a couple different theories, one of which is the thrifty genes hypothesis, that there are genes in the human body that are trying to save energy. So what they do is they actually save it in fat, and they wait for the times when you're going to be hungry again. And if there are simply times of excess and there are no times of famine, then you just accumulate more and more fat for the inevitable time famine, which, thanks to living in the land of prosperity, doesn't happen. So that could be one thing. Another is drifty genes. The idea that there are multiple different genes that happen to genetically drift in the human species that ended up giving a prevalence to obesity for this species. Could also be diet, which seems a little more likely because that's really been a big change since the 1860s, is the diet and the availability of high fructose corn syrup, Hostess in general, delivery food, DoorDash and such. I don't even want to know what this looks like after COVID. So that could be it. More likely though, it's a G by E interaction where the genes just happen to be in such a way that are going to interact with the environment to cause obesity. Which brings us to the other question, is this really a problem? Well, it's definitely a health crisis. There's really no doubt about that. But is it under natural selection? Well, no. Most individuals get obese after they have kids. And they have health problems after they have kids. So this doesn't affect survival. Is this a sexual selection thing? Well, I mean, there's body image questions right there. But apparently people can still get mates and still produce offspring. So it's still not a mating problem. Is it artificial selection? Well, humans aren't in charge of humans. So I'm guessing no. And it may be a microbial thing. And this is kind of a fun one. That if you actually switch the microbial communities of an individual who is obese with an individual who is not, you can actually get them to increase in body mass. So it could be the microbial environment having an impact on the, whoa. That's not heritable. That's not evolution. Yeah, but it's pretty cool that the fecal community, the bacteria in your stomach could actually be changing your body mass. Anyway, the short answer to all of this is hunter-gatherers aren't obese. But modern Americans living in a relatively sedentary lifestyle are. All right, last. Let's discuss this one. It's fever. This is a health quote-unquote problem. And I want to see fever. Fever, it's a problem, but how much of a problem is it and how much is it actually adaptive? Well, fever is in response to infection. What happens is individuals will increase their body temperature. This isn't just a temperature to denature the virus. It's actually increasing the metabolism. And increasing metabolism increases the activity of the white blood cells and increases antibody movement around the body. So all this good stuff is what destroys the virus or bacteria. Here we have some lizards that were given a injection with dead bacteria. And what happened was their body mounted a normal immune response. Great. Unless you inject them with sodium salicylate. Well, wait, a normal immune response for lizards, they can't warm themselves up. Yes, they can. They bask. They bask in warmer places when they are infected, or they think they're infected. That's their behavioral response. Is they change their basking temperature to change their internal temperature. But if you inject them with sodium salicylate and a bacterium, they don't bask in warmer places. They stay chill and they die because their body can't defend itself against the bacteria. So that's kind of the thing. This is actually a behavioral thing that is it can be countered by sodium salicylate, or as we would call it, aspirin. So using febrifuges or antipyretics, things that bring your temperature down, that actually decreases the antibody response, as you can see by the number of monocytes present, the how much the subjects actually had like acute and difficult nasal congestion, and this is also true with the days since infection. So they can take it's basically given a placebo, they'll recover faster than given Tylenol or aspirin or something like that. So you recover faster, you recover better. That's just what a fever does. It actually helps the body recover. So we see this as like a public health issue, that people are getting fevers and we should give them medicine, but in reality, you evolved to do this. You evolved to have a fever. This isn't a problem. Which brings another question, giving Tylenol to kids. So a kid has a fever, do you give them Tylenol? Well, they may have a fever longer, or they may sleep better and not have a fever as long. This is really up to the parents, and this is not a prescriptive course, but it's really worth looking into. And yeah, you should probably check out Medical Botany, #MedBot, in the fall, where we are discussing this kind of thing. So what would happen to a myopic, proto-human, some Neanderthal or Homo erectus out in the wild? How can we discriminate between genetic predispositions and evolutionary misalignments? And when should you prescribe an anti-fever medication? So these are public health questions with evolutionarily based answers.